Shannon McCool has been prosecuted as part of an investigation into the former carer's international child pornography ring.
He's a predator. An extremely dangerous individual.
As you can appreciate, he's been involved in very complex, horrific matters.
June 2014, a childcare worker in South Australia, Shannon McCool, was arrested on suspicion of running the world's largest pedophilia site on the dark web. However, his arrest proved to be just one piece of an intricate puzzle that led to the discovery of underground pedophiles connected from all corners of the globe. Vantage point. To the outside world, Shannon McCool was an ordinary guy, a good guy, and a government-employed family caregiver to some of South Australia's most vulnerable children. But on the dark web, he was the king and head administrator of a hardcore child pornography site with thousands of members worldwide. Nonetheless, the journey to attaining this depraved historic status began with a couple of missed red flags during McCool's early years as a care worker. Born in March 1982, McCool was raised in a southern suburb of Morphett Vale, where, despite his father's battle with cancer, he happily engaged with other children in the street and found contentment in life, or at least so he appeared to be. But it was after his parents' decision to move to Warradale, which zoned him to Brighton Primary School, that McCool's spiral into perversion began. At their new house, McCool's parents would make him wear only gray outfits to school, despite the normal school uniform being gray shorts, a yellow top, and a black jumper. This opened McCool to the unparalleled world of constant bullying from his peers, as he always seemed to be the odd one out. McCool was always in fights at school and would always be blamed as the instigator, even by his own parents. And before he clocked 10 years old, his mother and father would take him to a police station where an officer would lecture him about his behavior, making McCool not just terrified, but further disengaged from his family. In 1996, at the age of 14, McCool still struggled to fit in. This would be a time he would be going through puberty, and he began observing young girls in class, realizing that he was attracted to them in all kinds of ways. Subsequently, he would watch pornography excessively with other boys and close friends. But along the line, McCool noticed he wasn't as enthusiastic as they were. This made him realize that he had no sexual interest in adults, propelling him to surf the dark side of the web for something more depraved and frowned upon: child pornography. Watching CP spiked McCool's dopamine receptors to heights he'd never imagined. The more degenerate the material was, the more eager he was to feed his eyes. However, as the realization of what he was becoming started to dawn on him, so did the understanding of society's hatred and disgust for pedophiles. In a later interview, McCool vividly remembered a moment when he was watching a TV show. He would watch the strong aversion towards child sex offenders and the severity of their punishment if apprehended. At that point, he began to hate himself, but at the same time, was too scared to tell anyone or even seek help, in particular from his parents. Judging by how they handled his situation growing up, being bullied, and even taking him to the cops for his bad behavior, what would you think they would have done if they found out he was obsessed with CP? Right, it was probably something McCool didn't want to go through at that time. After graduating from high school, McCool spent the next 4 years studying IT at Queensland Skills Tech, building upon skills in computer science that would later be used to mask his crimes as the CEO of an international pornography website. But before this happened, he would move to Canada in 2004, where for the first time, he attempted to bring his degenerate fetishes to reality. Red flags. In 2004, McCool was employed at a kids' ski rental resort at Whistler, where his duties included fitting children with ski equipment. He worked there for about a year, and despite knowing his pedophilic tendencies, he would apply and get accepted as a camp counselor at this summer camp called Camp Horizons in Virginia, U.S. From May 2005 to August 2006, McCool worked at this camp with children as a lifeguard for the camp's pool, and even slept in the cabins alongside at least 10 boys with just one other staff member. But here's the thing. McCool felt his time in the U.S. and his ability to refrain from abusing any of those kids had cured him. He believed he had beaten his sexual urges or mental sickness, depending on how you look at it. And so finally happy again, he decided to return to Australia. However, getting back to Australia spun the whole story around, bringing us back to where it all started, with his obsession for McCool fell into the cruel hands of depression as he now lived alone with a less thrilling job as a communications technician. He missed the thrill of camp activities and wanted to do something more fun with himself. Now, this feeling drove him to once again search every corner of the dark web until he found something that made him feel better: a community of twisted, like-minded people who derived pleasure in sharing CP. After talking with these people, McCool wanted to explore the real-world adventures of being a predator. He began this sinister journey by getting an out-of-school hours care program at a suburban Adelaide primary school. There, McCool was hired to work casual shifts with kids. But along the line, some staff began questioning the way he behaved around these children, stating that on some occasions he had inappropriate physical contact with some of them. At this point, the administration didn't take the appropriate steps to investigate those allegations, and maybe if they did, what McCool eventually did next might have never happened. January 16, 2011. McCool worked his first shift for Nanny SA. After interviewing for the job a month before, the director of the out-of-school hours program, his friend, gave McCool a positive reference for this job. And on this job, he would work shifts at a care house with many children, with no adults guiding him, giving him an opportunity to live out his revolting fantasies at will. March 16, 2011. Nanny SA received an anonymous telephone call from a man who said he'd been told McCool was talking illicitly about the students he was caring for. And as obnoxious as that may sound, Nanny SA did absolutely nothing about it. The information wasn't addressed as a concern for McCool's behavior, but rather as a potential privacy breach. And although it led McCool to being fired, it didn't tarnish his career in any way. Now, barely 2 months after losing a job at Nanny SA, McCool got hired by another child care organization, Families SA. So here McCool would just continue doing what he was doing before, molesting children. A few months later, McCool repeated this act on another much younger victim. In this case, he would even take pictures of his victim and show them to his colleagues. It was quite disturbing, but McCool seemed like such a cool guy that no one even suspected him of anything. Now, unlike others who were enchanted by McCool's charm, this particular employee became extremely suspicious of him. Now, this worker, who remains anonymous, kept a close watch on McCool. This one time she saw him walk into a room of victims that he'd been caring for and heard one of them say,
"Get it out of my face. I don't want it in my mouth."
Another time she walked in on Shannon behaving suspiciously while he changed one of the victim's underwear. It was at this point she knew McCool was up to no good. But there seemed to be no one she could talk to about this, partly because of the high recommendations McCool received during his employment. For some context, Family SA Director of Residential Care, Mrs. Nicole Stasiak, only employed McCool because of his years of work with children through Nanny SA, the OSHC Center, Camp Horizon, and his ultimately clean background. Encouraging references were provided by Nanny SA, people who were obviously unaware McCool had been abusing those he was paid to protect. Now, these references helped seal his employment and even came in handy in getting a promotion at Families SA. Unfortunately, the deeper, darker secrets of McCool's soul weren't made known. Through a common background check, you couldn't tell he was practicing pedophilia. And while he just kept ruining the lives of many victims under his care, he decided to dive deeper into the world of pedophilia by launching a global website to connect to other depraved minds around the world. The Dark Web. It was one of the world's largest and most secure pedophilia networks, an online space where tens of thousands traded horror. The website dealt in abuse, while videos and images of these victims were swapped and boasted about on a forum. Accessible only through an encrypted browser, membership was tightly managed. Quiet accounts raised suspicion and could be terminated at any moment. Those who stayed had to upload new material frequently, and more disturbingly, more than 45,000 people complied. But what those thousands of people never realized, even as top users began to disappear, was that this site was being run by the police. Let us explain. For 6 months in 2014, inside a pale office in the Australian city of Brisbane, an elite squad of detectives were administering the site, analyzing images, monitoring conversations, and connecting users with their crimes. By the time they pulled the plug on the forum, 85 victims had been rescued and hundreds of people across the globe had been arrested. Among them was Shannon McCool, the actual author of the site, and Richard Huckle, the man who caused McCool's downfall. So to really understand the gravity behind Shannon's fall, we have to talk about the man who controlled it, Richard Huckle. the same man that everyone said was the most notorious pedophile to have ever walked the earth. Born May 14, 1986, to middle-class parents in the UK, Huckle's journey to becoming the world's most perverted pedophile began with him getting a digital camera for his 17th birthday. This fueled ambitions to become a photographer, but unfortunately this gift would later darken its shade in the hands of Huckle, as he would film illicit content with hundreds of victims. He got a job with an organization taking photos in an animal conservation camp with a number of other Britons. But Huckle went to the organization's head office, explaining that he would rather offer his services to schools and orphanages, given he had a college degree. Consequently, he was sent with a fellow employee, Sammy G, to assist in teaching English to young children. Sammy and Huckle were required to share an apartment. However, according to Sammy G, Huckle kept to himself and really didn't interact with anybody, not even with the kids in school. Nonetheless, that didn't stop Huckle from causing sadistic problems. October 2005, Huckle, who was already a pastor at this time, was given the opportunity to teach Sunday school to young children at the Praise Church in Malaysia. However, this would be the breeding ground for his horrible crimes. Huckle kept a diary, documenting his evil acts. This led to an interesting turn in his story. Huckle's diary was exposed by one of the churchgoers, and when the higher-ups digested the disgusting details of it, they fired Huckle as a pastor. But for some reason, he was hired back after a week. And even worse, they put him back in contact with children. We're just as shocked as you might be. But best believe it was at this point that Huckle orchestrated the worst of his crimes. He grew fond of one particular victim in church, and for several years, Huckle raped and abused her beyond human comprehension. Everything he did to that poor innocent girl was filmed on his camera and uploaded to different pedophilia sites on the dark web. The victim summoned up the courage to report Huckle to her dad, and in turn her father told the cops, who ridiculously brushed off the case. The saddest part was the victim was scolded and told never to speak of it again. We don't know if these guys had any secret connection with Huckle or if they were just being unprofessional, and it really doesn't matter because that just shows sheer stupidity, leading Huckle to establish himself at other churches as an English teacher and photographer who wanted to educate children. This just gave him access to more victims to molest. He toured around one specific community in Malaysia, and residents welcomed him, even giving him a place to stay while he was there. The villagers said he came across as a normal person and seemed really religious. Conversely, for almost a decade, Huckle molested and raped over 30 victims from that exact community. And if you're wondering why the parents trusted Huckle so much, well, it was basically due to his manner of approach. Huckle would give the families printed photos he took of their kids, thereby earning their trust and allowing him to initiate a conversation. That conversation would then end up with Huckle offering to teach their children English for free. These unsuspecting parents, already perceiving him as a nice gentleman, would waste no time in agreeing to his offer. How could they have known that their kids were paying the price for his teachings and free pictures in ways unfathomable? Huckle did this for years, and more times than not, he'd upload videos of him doing unimaginable things to these victims on the dark web. There were a few places online where he'd like to distribute this evil media, but his favorite place was a site called The Love Zone. Coincidentally, that's the same site Shannon McCool built. Beginning of the end.
The level of material, the amount of material you posted was significant enough, high enough amount of material.
Huckle's frequent uploads on the Love Zone paved the way for his friendship towards Shannon McCool. Even though they never met face to face, they shared a common interest: molesting children and boasting about it online. At the time, the Love Zone was hosted on the dark web as a major hotspot for pedophiles to go and get their sick stimulation material. The site would even have categories where users could pick what kind of abuse they were into. It was a complete shit show, but Huckle soon became the loose thread that was pulled to uncover McCool's identity. Out of the said 45,000 users, one obviously had to be the weak link. And at the early stages of the police uncovering this site, one man stood out: Brian Wade. 42-year-old Canadian Brian Wade had built a film distribution company named Azov Films. Internationally, people could order these films from this secret company and have them sent to their homes wherever in the world. But in this international investigation called Project Spade, information about Wade's company came to light after one of his packages was intercepted en route to its customer. It took investigators 7 long months, but finally they were able to track Wade to his home in Canada. When Canadian police raided his premises, they found it piled with refuse. The bathrooms were sheeted in thick mold, while the entire place was in disarray, typical of what you'd expect from a predator. It was also during this raid that authorities discovered Wade had made business deals worth over $4 million between him and his clients. He also had over 45 terabytes of film involving 386 different victims. At the time, this was the largest bust on child pornography. But Wade, who was eventually arrested and charged with crimes related to child abuse, kept a meticulous record of every single distribution he ever made. This record had the names, addresses, and contacts of all his customers. And out of 370 customers here, a tenth of them were found in Queensland, Australia. Now, as sick as these pedophiles are, many of them were clever enough to give Wade false names and addresses to receive their product. This made the job of tracking everyone a little bit harder. However, after a month of going through Wade's records, one customer was discovered to have naively provided his real address. This customer was from Germany, and it didn't take long for authorities to apprehend him there. Once they caught him, his confession provided a link between McCool's dark website and Wade's CP distribution. The German claimed to have been a member of the Love Zone. Coincidentally, Wade had paid some users of this site to sell the soft copy of his material, pointing authorities towards the dark web. Utilizing the German user's account, authorities were able to gain more meaningful insight into the affairs of the site. There they found out the more material a user posted, the higher their rank on that platform. It became clear that to dismantle this site, they needed to attack those on the top of the food chain, people like Huckle and McCool. Their investigation was passed down to Argos-A, Queensland Police Unit, that specializes in disrupting child abuse networks online.
And as soon as we had a sniff that we were dealing with an Australian who was potentially the lead administrator, well, that presents a challenge that we were prepared to take on.
Inspector John Roos, the man who commands the Argos task force, used the content from an actual child molestation video to lure Huckle and others into his trap. The task force used a hyperlink directing users to an external site, hosting as a bait video. So when a user opened that video and began watching, session identifiers would collect all their account details and IP address. The task force continued running this bait site, while investigators compiled the list of names and IP addresses. They arrested a lot of people from around the world. Accounts kept going idle, but due to the large number of users, McCool didn't notice anything suspicious.
We knew there were certainly significant suggestions that he was an Australian.
Paul Griffiths, a police officer working with Argos in Queensland as a victim identification specialist, scanned, using an arrested user's account, gigabytes of images and videos each week looking for clues, a brand of food or a grain of wood that might have given away a victim's location, or an ascent that would point to a particular location. It must have been a very terrifying and disturbing job, but it had to get done. Above his desk was a whiteboard, scrawled with 24 usernames, the forum's most wanted. Huckle was on the site's producer tier, meaning he was one of the users who uploaded the most content. Huckle believed that most of these users were fakes, as he was actually out there living the life and not uploading someone else's content. This made it difficult to apprehend Huckle, as he was smart enough to obscure faces and backgrounds in each video he posted. It was a challenge for authorities, but they were able to get a lead through his camera's metadata. Consequently, they found the business name, Huckle Photography Productions. That little piece of information connected to his Facebook page, and it would be on this page that investigators would get all the answers they needed. Huckle had been posting himself in pictures with kids that were seen in the videos uploaded to the site. The Malaysian police were immediately contacted, but they claimed that there wasn't enough evidence for them to go after him. This meant they had to wait more months before Huckle traveled to another country where his arrest would be processed, and it didn't take long before that day came. In 2014, Huckle took a plane back to the UK, and so did the authorities. He was apprehended at the airport, but without access to his hard drives, a formal arrest couldn't be issued. In turn, Huckle went to his mommy to confess everything that he did. Horrified by what her son told her, she immediately called the police and begged them to come pick up her son. Luckily, the police managed to crack one of his encryptions, and this gave him access to over 20,000 images of victims he had molested. They never even fully cracked all his encryptions. Whatever they could get access to was way more than enough to charge him. Given his position on the site, authorities were finally able to penetrate the top hierarchy of users. There they found some bizarre things, including some advice from the CEO on how to evade police detection. They had a 180-page manual titled "The Exclusive Step-by-Step Guide for Practicing Safe and Fun with." And also, Huckle himself had authored his own 60-page book titled "Pedophiles and Poverty: Lover Guide." As crazy as all that was, the police were still worried about one user, McCool. They knew that he was the man in charge, but there was absolutely no way to know who he was. All they had was this 5-letter word he used at the opening of every message he sent: "Highas."
And one of the things that I noticed was that on a number of occasions he's used that specific greeting, Highas, H-I-Y-A-S.
Danish authorities had already supplied Argos with a razor-thin lead that the site's kingpin was somewhere in Australia, probably Adelaide. Some of the children in the work he produced were clearly indigenous. In one of his images, a girl was splayed on a bed and a sheet of paper beside her read Aussie. A quick search of the word Highas turns up about 500,000 results, and in most cases, it's a term used by women. The odds of tracking McCool down seemed impossible, but one thing was certain: he was bound to let his guard slip. And if that ever happened, his arrest would swiftly follow. June 6, 2014, a man was discovered using the word Highas on a 4-wheel drive discussion forum. According to the location on his account, he lived in Adelaide, that same location the kingpin was said to be in. Even more shocking was that the username of this man was pretty close to the one used by the website's kingpin. There'd be another user with a similar name using Highas in almost every post of a basketball forum. It definitely was more than a coincidence at this point, and the cops knew it. The 4-wheel drive user had to ask advice for raising his car's suspension. People had replied suggesting parts, and in turn the cops were able to find someone on Facebook who was trying to source those suggested parts. Investigators also noticed that McCool bit his fingernails, and that he had a distinctive freckle on a finger on his right hand. While he was careful not to show the faces of any of the children in his sick pictures, the freckle was gold-plated evidence, matching the one seen in his Facebook photos. At this point, his ID was revealed, and they found out he had just come off a 3-month suspension for allegedly assaulting a victim at Families SA. McCool was caught climbing the bed of this victim under his care, making her shout,
Stop! Don't tickle me there.
When a female employee rushed into the room, McCool immediately jumped from the bed and brushed past her, while she saw the victim on her hands and knees on top of the bed covers, with the look of sheer terror on her face. The incident was reported in great detail to McCool's superiors, which resulted in him getting suspended. The case was referred to the police. However, once again, they claimed they couldn't carry out a criminal investigation because there wasn't enough evidence to support sexual assault claims. Nonetheless, it helped authorities ascertain McCool was their guy. 7:30 p.m., June 10th, 2014. Multiple detectives made their way to McCool's house to arrest him. But listen closely, because here's where the real thrill of his end came in. While it would have no doubt have been a simple thing to just kick his front door in and arrest him, detectives hoped, rather needed, to catch him online, thereby giving them access to his website. You need to understand that simply closing his laptop would log him off the site, denying him access, as the Tor encryption software he used to build it would kick in. It was essential he be caught off guard. It was decided that 2 detectives, one whose name is Hegarty, would simply knock on his front door, armed with just a general search warrant, but mindful that he might dash to his laptop if he sensed danger. Detective Hegarty knocked on his door, and it just took seconds for him to open up. But once he did, he was quickly detained by Hegarty and placed on a chair just beside the front door. McCool was stunned. He wasn't expecting it, and within seconds his house was storming with detectives from SCIB, E-Crime, and 2 members of Argos. Their plan worked. McCool's laptop was open and connected to his hard drive, but they definitely weren't expecting what they found. They saw this private file containing 593 images and 57 videos documenting his own activities with victims. This man was arrested, and further investigations revealed that he had molested arrested over 100 victims in over 15 years. His arrest would lead to the arrest of 1,000 other users, as authorities now had access to the back end of the site. Consequently, they posted a message from McCool's account to the forum, saying,
"We've survived a lot of ups and downs. It's been a passion of mine for a long time, and the Love Zone is bigger than ever. Believe it or not, the board doesn't run itself and requires a lot of thankless hours from the admins, co-admins, and mods. So the board will go into maintenance mode till the new year to give the admin team time to a break. It'll return in 2015, refreshed and better than ever."
Now that was done to stop users from posting more depraved content while giving authorities time to gather enough evidence needed to prosecute hundreds of those tracked down. For months, the most significant users were being picked up by different authorities as more evidence was disseminated around the world, while some smart users noticed people were disappearing and proceeded to delete their accounts. It's probably an occupational hazard, and these pedos typically assume that when someone disappears, they've been arrested. However, when it keeps happening repeatedly, they began to put two and two together. Users would write on McCool's account with worry, saying that the police had infiltrated the site once they realized the forum wasn't returning, and news finally emerged of McCool's arrest. Thousands deleted their accounts, and the site was left empty. August 7th, 2015, McCool was given 35 years in prison, and because he helped investigators catch more men, they reduced it to 28 years. While many Australians and people around the world celebrated Shannon McCool's arrest, many more people can't stop questioning whether his sentence truly corresponded to the agonizing crimes he committed. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. What do you think?